All right. As we come together today, if you read the email last night, I was reading some things that started to flow together. That happens to me from time to time. I just go around and I pick up different books and I pop them open, and they seem to be uh, speaking to the same theme, the generative theme. It's kind of the same. It's the same ideas expressed differently, said in a different way. You remember Joseph Campbell when he was talking about the mythology of the world. He could kind of see back through what he called the costumes and and the color and the imagery of a particular culture, and he could see that these different stories in mythology were trying to point to the same fundamental truths that people all around the world seem to have something within them that already was wanted to recognize and wanted to express something. And they created stories that they would tell that helped convey that truth. That's what a myth is. And in our culture, we have come to accept the definition of myth as being a fallacy, something that's not true. And that is one of the definitions of a myth. But another definition is it is a story, a teaching story, a parable, a fable that holds some of the deepest truths, the deepest ideas of a culture. And it's passed on from generation to generation, you know. And when we're getting the story, when we're hearing this story, we're getting the values, we're getting the ideas, we're being reminded of what what is truly important, what is truly important in life. So I think the first thing we want to kind of think about is if we think about our lives, if we think about everything about us, the circumstances in our lives, everything that we've experienced up until now, everything that we shall experience from this point going forward, we might want to think of those events, those circumstances, those people in our lives as kind of being the story, our own story, kind of playing out. That just as the mythology of the cultures kind of rise up from something deep in the subconscious of that culture, or the collective unconscious, if you want to call it. Sometimes we struggle with that word because it's not unconscious, it's conscious, but it's below our level of conscious awareness. So subliminal is probably a better term. There is a subliminal consciousness. There's something that we're not quite aware of at the conscious level, but yet it speaks to us. It informs us. You know, Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. In his work, Man and His Symbols, he was talking about how the same symbols arise in many different cultures. The same ideas, the same thing that Campbell was saying. There's some primordial ideas or archetypes. There's some things that are very, very important to the human experience that just keep coming up for different people in different times in different places. And I invite you today to just take a step back with me. Take a step back from the busyness of everyday life. Take a step back from the ordinariness of everyday life. And just be in that mystical place, that mythical place of viewing your life, viewing everything about you as a story that is unfolding. Kind of like your own fairy tale, your own fable. It is the story of your life. When we go to sleep at night and we dream, we are in the midst of these elaborate stories that are nothing more, as far as we can tell, they're nothing more than a creation of our mind, a creation of our own consciousness. There's all these different characters in that story, you know. Some are friendly, some are not so friendly. There's all these different situations that we're in. We might be in a very nice, pleasant situation, having a vacation on a sailboat somewhere. Or we might be in a frightening situation where we find ourselves running and being chased and all these kind of things. We might even be in a magical situation where we're flying without an airplane, or we're walking on the floor of the ocean without any type of breathing apparatus. It's all kind of a creation of consciousness. It's all a welling up of consciousness, and it's all taking place pretty much at the subliminal level, pretty much below our level of conscious awareness. We don't usually become aware of the fact that we're asleep and it's a dream. Now we can do that. There is a way of training our minds to do that. If you're interested in that, go to the Internet Archive and look for a book called The Tibetan Yoga of Dreams and Sleep. Very interesting book. But the Tibetan Buddhists of thousands of years ago realized that we could be consciously aware of the fact that we were asleep. We could become consciously aware of the fact that what we were experiencing was a dream. And we could consciously then direct that dream. We could behave in that dream the way that we would wish to behave in the world. See, we're in the world, and we understand from experience, from people telling us, from what we see in the news and read in the papers and all those kind of things. There is a way that the world works, and we're firmly convinced that the world knows the way the world works. When we are in the world, we have to work according to the way the world works. That's what we believe, remember? And it's done unto us according to our belief. So that's what we believe. But we also believe that there's this thing called our spirit or our soul or our consciousness or whatever you want to call it. And we think, or we hope, or we wish that things work differently at the spiritual level. But we're not quite sure. We're not quite sure that we believe that carries over into the physical experience. We go to work and we're told by the way of the world, well, you have to work hard. You have to work hard for your money. And we believe that, And we're told, watch out for yourself. People will take everything they can from you on the job, and don't give them any more than you have to, and all of these kinds of things, If you think about business, business is trying to sell something to somebody. And they're going to give people as much as they have to in order to get what they want back. It's a transaction. And everything comes down to that transaction. Now, I'm not saying that businesses are going to cheat. Some do, of course, human nature being the way they are. But if they're giving you more than the competitor, they're doing it for a self-serving reason, a selfish reason. They believe that they're going to distinguish themselves from the competition. That way they're going to create a brand. As a product manager, we would just look at it and say, well, instead of spending a lot of money on marketing and advertisement, we'll just, give away a little bit more product, and word of mouth will be our advertising. My point is that in the business world, we're always trying to get as much as we can while giving as little as we have to. This is the whole buy low, sell high, collect early, pay late method of doing business. Hold on to every dollar you can. Spiritual world tells us something entirely differently. See, the spiritual world tells us it's done unto you according to your belief. It's done unto you according to your belief. And we don't know, we're trying to figure out, well, how does that apply to the world that we live in? How does that apply to going to work or going to school, or how does that apply to relationships and marriage and raising families? And we're kind of feeling our way through that as we go through this life experience. We're kind of trying to figure that all out. It's like the Buddhists say, we arrive here and the game is already in progress. And we spend a good deal of our time trying to figure out how the game is played. And once we think we get a handle on how the game is played, then we try to find a comfortable place for us to play it, a comfortable place for us to play. We may not want to win, some people want to win everything that they do. We may not want to win by whatever winning means according to that game, getting the most money, having the most houses, all those kind of materialistic things that society tells us. We may just want to be comfortable. We may just want to be able to go to work and make a living and have a nice place to live and food to eat and money for recreation, things like that. To us, where we want to be, that is defined. That is the way that we define success. But we study these other things, these spiritual things, and these spiritual things are telling us, but you don't understand. You see, everything is right of consciousness. Everything is right of consciousness, and the income that you get and the income that you can hold on to is determined by your consciousness, not by how hard you work, but how smart you work. And what the Tibetan Buddhists in the yoga of dreams and sleep were telling us is that if you can become aware of the fact that you are asleep and that you are in a dream, then you can practice these things while you are dreaming. You can conduct yourself in your dreams the way that you would like to conduct yourself in your waking life, except that you're not quite sure yet. You're not quite sure that this really is going to apply to your waking life. And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about work hard or work smart. Work hard or work smart. The way of the world tells you, get up early, be there a half hour early, stay a half hour late, get there before anybody else, leave after anybody else, work hard and you'll be rewarded and you'll make lots and lots of money. And it depends upon how hard you work. If you read any of the biographies of Teddy Roosevelt, he said that when he was in college, he wanted to be number one in his class, but he had very strong competition from another student. And he was able to see that other student's dorm room light from where Teddy was. And he just made himself a promise that he would not turn off his light until at least a half hour after the other student had. So he would sit there and he would study and he'd study, and he'd look out the window and he'd sit there and he'd study and he'd study. And when that other light went out, he would put in another 30 minutes and then he would turn out his light and go to bed. And of course he attributed his success to that extra effort, working hard, those kind of things. So we understand that. We understand that in our culture. But I want you to think of the kind of the dichotomy of what's going on in our culture itself. Because even though we have this myth, we have this collective myth that you have to work hard for your money, you have to eat your bread by the sweat of your brow. This is mythology of Genesis that is coming up. This is a story by which human beings are explaining their condition. Why, if God is so good, why do we have to work hard? Why do we have to eat our bread by the sweat of our brow? And the mythology is as well, because Adam and Eve sinned, you see, because Adam and Eve sinned. Dr. Rocco Errico, in his explanation of the Aramaic culture in terms of studying the Bible, says, you have to understand that many of these stories that we take in our culture to be literally true were stories that were developed after the fact as teaching stories. So you can imagine a child walking down the road with its parent, and they pass Sodom and Gomorrah. They pass these ruins of this ancient town, and the child says, well, what happened to those people? And the father says, well, those people, they weren't good people, and they got punished, you see. So we have to kind of look at these things and realize that in many cases, what may have started out kind of with a good intention, of parents trying to teach their kids to behave and to do the will of God, over time they have become ingrained in our culture, and we literally believe that, for example, that we have to eat our bread by the sweat of our brow because we've been cursed because of the sin of Adam. Think of modern day fairy tales. Think of Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood might be a similar kind of story. We take it as a fairy tale. We read it to our children and tell our children about it. They turn it into cartoons. They do all these things. But really what that is, it was a cautionary tale. The parents were teaching the young girls to stay away from the wolves, stay away from the men, to protect themselves. I only bring these things in because what it means is to me is two things that we want to consider. One is, what are the things that we believe to be true about work that may not be true, but because we believe they are true, we are doomed to constantly live under their effect. Right? We live in a world where it's done unto us according to our belief. If we believe we have to work hard for our money, we will have to work hard for our money. If we believe life is meant to be a struggle, life will be a struggle for us. And we will, as we create our story, like we create our dream at night, we're creating a different level of the dream in what we call a waking state. We bring into this dream experience that we're having, we bring in all of the characters at the right place, at the right time. They come into the story that we are creating out of our consciousness. And it reinforces itself. The story reinforces itself. You see, I expected that. What did you expect? That's the way it would be. So on the one hand, our society is deeply in the belief that you have to work hard and you have to struggle. But on the other hand, it is doing everything it can to eliminate physical labor or work by inventing tools, by inventing better ways, and all these kind of things. When Lori and I first moved to North Carolina in the 1970s, I thought it would be wonderful to have 20 acres of land, and we could have this farm, and we could raise animals, and we could grow crops. And wouldn't it be wonderful? Kind of as a teenager, I listened to Buffy St. Marie, want to be a country girl again, sitting on a big front porch with rabbits in the pen, that kind of thing. And everybody I talked to who grew up on a farm, every one of them, said it was absolutely the hardest work they had ever done in their lives. And they were glad to be off the farm. So we go through the South and we look at these mill towns and these mill villages where when the industrial age took over and they could build these big factories near the railroad tracks, and they could bring the cotton in from the fields to the factory, and they could turn it from raw cotton, they could turn it into some type of a finished product that they could sell. People moved off the farms. People came in off the farms because it was, even working 12 hours a day in the cotton mill was better than working 18 hours a day on the farm. And they needed a place to live, and the business owners knew that if they wanted to have a workforce, they had to have a place to live. So they built these mill villages. And when we were living in Hickory, there were still people living in mill villages. I'm sure there are today. And they were paying $1 a month rent. So they worked at the mill for comparatively low wages, but they paid $1 a month rent. Now, the apartment was like 600 square feet. It wasn't a big apartment, but they got a place to live. And that was because number one, the employers needed somebody to work, and number two, as bad as it was working in the mill, it was better for most than working on the farm. Not everyone. Some people love it, working on the farm, but most everybody that I've talked to agreed it was the hardest work that they've ever had. And if you think about it, many years ago, if you've ever looked at land, at the way that land is measured, they talk about a square rod of land. And that was the amount of land that a man could turn over with a shovel in one day. This is before horse-drawn plows, before people could afford horses, or before they had invented the plow. I don't know where it came from. But can you imagine getting out there with a shovel and going through your entire yard and just turning the dirt over one shovelful at a time until you could do that to enough land to grow all of the food that you needed to provide for your family, and then to perhaps have extra to barter or to sell? And yet that's the way it used to be. That was work. And of course somebody comes along then and they've got this plow that you can pull with an animal, an oxen, a horse, or a mule, but you can pull this plow and you can plow the field. Would you ever go back to using that shovel? You think you would say, nah, I don't want to walk behind a horse. I'll just do this. No, of course not. You say, wow, it saves me time. It saves me money. I can do more. And then of course what happens is you say, well, then I can buy more land and I can plow more and I can sell more, and all these things start to set in. But over time then what happened is the plow, the horse-drawn plow, got replaced with a machine, an internal combustion plow or a steam-powered plow that would plow the soil. And then we developed these huge plows that you see going down the field, that they have this huge tractor with a boom that might go 30 feet from side to side with all discs on it, and they can go down through a field and they can plow it. When Thomas Jefferson was president, 95% of the population was involved in farming. When George W. Bush was president, 5% of the population was involved in farming. So what I'm getting to is that even though we have a society that tells us you have to work, our society is constantly looking for ways to work smarter, not to work harder. And then of course what that does is it puts the wage earners, what are they going to do for work? What are they going to do as their jobs get displaced and things like that? And the traditional belief had always been, well, when one industry declines, a new industry will pop up and it will employ the workers. But what we're starting to see now is we're getting to a point where as the new industries come up, it needs fewer and fewer people. They built a data center near here for Amazon or Google, I'm not sure which, one of the two, just up the highway here. And when they were building it, it was just, in the paper, it was just how wonderful it was, bringing all these new jobs to the community and all these things. And when they finished building it, I think the whole thing needed 16 people to operate because everything else was automated. My point there is that even though our society is telling us that you need to work hard for your money, or because of the economics involved, our society is always looking for ways to take the work out. Even now, the talk of the robots at the fast food restaurant. So instead of standing there at the counter and telling somebody you want a hamburger and a Coke and French fries, you can push that into a machine yourself, and that person's job is eliminated. And it's not just because of wages, it's because of benefits, it's because of taxes, it's because of all of those things. So our society is always going to be looking for ways to kind of eliminate things. And we have to ask ourselves then at our own individual life, do we want to work harder or do we want to work smarter? Now, we can say working smarter, can take place at the intellectual level. We can invent things. We could go into jobs where we use our brain rather than our brawn. We could become computer programmers and all those kinds of things. And that is true, and we can do those things. Or do we want to take a step back and work at the spiritual level? To work at the spiritual level. Now, what do I mean by that? I've kind of alluded to it a little bit as we've gone through here. But life is a matter of consciousness. It is done unto us according to our belief. I mentioned a few weeks ago in the New Testament, when the New Testament gives us a story where Jesus is calling the disciples to come and follow him. And the disciples' response back is, well, we'd love to do that. We'd really love to be able to just wander around the countryside and listen to you speak forever and ever, and maybe even go out and teach a little bit on our own. It would be just wonderful to do that. But we're practical men. We've got things to do. We've got people to see. We've got places to go. We've got families to feed. We've got boats to paint and nets to mend and all these things. And the response, the spiritual response in the story, is that the divine in heaven knows what you need before you ask. Seek first the kingdom. Seek first the kingdom, and all of these things will be added unto you. So we have this problem in our culture that we need to, as spiritual beings, if we are going to grow. And I think that that's the purpose of our lives. That is why we are here, is to grow in spirit. By which I mean to develop a deeper understanding of what that is. An understanding that comes not just from reading the books or listening to the Sunday talks, but an understanding that comes from a personal experience. A personal experience of the love of God, a personal experience of the activity of God in our lives. We're here to grow. We're here to develop this deeper understanding. But yet we're in the world and we have to make a living, or we have to have a living, let's put it that way. We have to have resources in order to live. And we have been taught that the physical things are not spiritual. This is a big point that we have to really get our mind around, right? So there's another saying in the New Testament that says you can't serve both God and money. There's a parable we're told of a rich young man who says, I do everything I'm supposed to do. I go to the church and to the temple when I'm supposed to. I pay my taxes to the church. I take care of the poor. I do all of the things that we're told to do. What else can I do? What can I do to find this kingdom that you're talking about? What can I do to find this presence of God within that you're talking about? And the response was, take all your material things, take everything you have and sell them and give it to the poor, and then come follow me. And we're told that the young man went away muttering to himself. Couldn't do it. Went away muttering to himself. Now, typically we have been taught by well-intentioned people, but we've been taught that money is evil. And yet that's not what the New Testament says. It says the love of money is the root of all evil. It doesn't say that money is evil. It says the love of money is the root of all evil. So I want you to think about what would have happened had this rich young man who, for my interpretation, or for my understanding the story, understood the ways of the world well enough to have accumulated wealth. Maybe inherited, I don't know. But he was okay with the wealth of the world and the way it worked, and he understood that game and how to play it. And what he was being asked to do is to forget about that game and come learn a totally new one. A totally new game. And he couldn't do it. The problem was not that we're being told that, well, the material is bad. It's our attachment to it that's bad. It's our belief that it is real that is the trouble. We don't understand. We don't understand. And what we've been told by the mystics throughout the ages is that these things that we see and these things that we experience in the physical world are there by our right of consciousness, by a right of our consciousness. The people who show up in our lives show up there because at some level we've invited them, even if it's unpleasant. We don't, most of us look back and say, well, what was I thinking when I brought that one into my life? But they're there by law of attraction. We have to stop. We have to stop and say to ourselves, do I live in a spiritual universe or do I live in a physical universe? See, most traditional theology tells you, well, you live in a physical universe until you die, and then you'll go live in a spiritual universe. And in most of those teachings, all of the things that you can't have here while you're on earth because they're bad, well, you get to have those in heaven, see. The streets are paved with gold and all of these things, kind of deferred gratification. We're told in the traditional theologies, look at the people that are making all the money now, the people that are cheating and stealing, well, they're gonna suffer forever. But you who are suffering now, well, you're gonna have everything then that they have now. And there's this kind of really confusing thing that is set up for us. So what we're getting, when I looked at Emerson and I looked at Eric Butterworth, the theme that was coming together, the theme that was starting to come through in their ideas is that what we get, what we earn, what we have, and what we keep are reflections of our consciousness. That even if we go into a situation where everybody else is trying to cheat one another and everybody else is trying to steal from one another and everybody else is trying to use one another and all of these kind of things, even if we go into that situation and we don't get caught up in that consciousness, we will be fine. Now there's something in our society also that we need to look at, which is we are used to the transaction. We are used to saying, well, if I go to work at this job for 40 to 60 hours a week, I need to get enough income from that job. It has to come from that job in order to give me all of the things that I want. And if we stop and step back a little bit and say, but I am a spiritual being, and the resources that I need to live are, in fact, spiritual energy, if you want to call it life energy, spiritual energy taking the form that is appropriate at this time, taking the fish that I need to catch, taking the money that I need to spend. If all of these things are just the invisible energy of God taking that form at that time, why does it have to come to me in the way that I, through my human intellect and my human ego, say it must come? Can we step back and accept the manna from heaven? Can we accept that which appears in our life? We talked about this last week with receiving and giving. Can we accept that which comes to us, but not through an ordinary means, not through a way that we would expect? Because what we expect is going to limit what we can get. It can only come to us then through the way that we expect. I love the slogan, expect the unexpected. Well, if I expected it, then it wouldn't be unexpected. Expect the unexpected. Do we recognize that God has ways and means that go beyond our limited ability to think and to understand? We go back to the analogy of birth. When our little bodies were growing in our mother's womb, our lungs were breathing in fluid. We didn't need to take in oxygen through the lungs because it was coming to us through the umbilical cord. It's coming to our little bodies through the umbilical cord. And by moving the fluid in and out, our lung muscles developed so that they would be able to do their job for as long as we are here on this planet. And when our mothers went into labor and our little bodies started to be pushed down through the birth canal, we were compressed, the bodies were compressed. And that fluid was pushed out of our lungs by a normal process, the process of birth. So that as we entered this world, our lungs were completely empty. And yet there was an intelligence within the body that knew what to do. The little muscles and ribs expand. And when they did, we took our first breath. We took our first breath. Now you and I didn't have to know how to do anything. There was an intelligence within us that did that. We are in this flow that the air that we breathe in comes to us from the plants, and the air we breathe out goes back to the plants. We are in this flow of life. We want to grow spiritually. We want to grow out of the idea that we have to work hard. We want to get beyond the idea that we want to work smarter intellectually. And we want to ask ourselves, what is the most important thing in our lives? And it's to know God. As I said, we learned in the catechism, to know God. To recognize ourselves as a spiritual being. And to every day live that day in as much awareness as we can of the fact that we are spiritual beings here and now. To recognize that the circumstances in our lives, the physical circumstances, the financial circumstances, the jobs that we have, the jobs that we lose, all of that is by right of consciousness. Emmett Fox wrote a book called The Ten Commandments, and he went through the Ten Commandments and he kind of explained them as laws, not things that we need to obey because of a fear of punishment, but rather as a principle. That where it says in the Bible, thou shalt not, and if we would replace it with thou cannot, you can't do this, then it takes on a different meaning for us and it starts to lead us to a deeper explanation. And when he talks about you cannot steal, you cannot steal. Now, we all grew up with this, thou shalt not steal. You don't take things that don't belong to you. And that's a good rule, and it existed long before Moses went up the mountain in other cultures. So do we believe, you know that the very presence of God appeared to Moses as Moses was having the burning bush experience, the deep mystical experience, the fire that burns but does not consume. Moses is in this deep meditative state. The earth is shaking, the smoke is rising. All of these symbols that we're getting, the kind of like dreamlike symbols that we're getting. Do we really think that the very God itself said, tell them not to steal? Maybe there's a deeper meaning. So what Emmett Fox goes on to explain to us is you cannot steal. You cannot get and retain that which you do not have the consciousness for. It's like the people who win the lottery and a couple years later they're broke. You cannot get and retain that which you do not have the consciousness for. Now, if we have the consciousness that says if I have to work very, very hard for my money, I've got to work 60 hours a week, I have to keep my light on a half hour later than anybody else, and I have to get up a half hour before, and all those things. Well, and that's the way it will work for us. It's done unto us according to our belief. But you and I don't have to buy into that dream. See, that's just a dream. It's just like us going to sleep at night and populating our dream world with all of these conditions and these characters, and then we awake during the day and we think we're awake, but we're just dreaming at a different level. We're having a different level of the dream. Do we want to grow spiritually? Do we want to recognize that the intelligence that could create an entire universe out of nothing but itself, nothing but energy, the intelligence that could create an entire universe, which is a physical thing, is perfectly capable of providing itself as us everything that is required for us to live as we grow. And I think there's a key in there, because in the world of materialism, we're told you have to have more and more stuff. Got to have more stuff. You need more. You need a bigger house so you can put more stuff. You need storage units so you can keep all your extra stuff in, And we don't need more than is necessary. We don't need more than what is required to support our mission here, which is to grow. I want you to think about something in the world of materialism. Lori and I used to teach prosperity classes, and in one of the books that we were working from, it was called How to Get Out of Stay Out of Debt, How to Get Out of Debt, Stay Out of Debt, and Live Prosperously. That was the name of the book. And I believe it is in that book that the author suggests, I want you to think of the dollars that you spend as units of life energy. Now that's the way of the world. That's the way out there in the material world. But think of it that way, units of life energy. And everything that you acquire is part of your life. It's part of your life energy that you gave. You gave in order to bring this thing in. And in those days, the credit card debt was running between 18 and 19%. That was the interest rate. And we'd ask people, how much of what you have did you charge? And it was almost all of it. 1/5, almost 1/5 of your life energy, or their life energy, was simply going for, the only purpose was that they had to have it now, rather than waiting. Instant gratification. When we would explain it to people in that way, they would say, oh my God, I'm working one day a week I'm going to work just so I can have it now. And how much of what we absolutely had to have right now are we using, We buy it, we put it in the closet, we put it off to the side, and we never get to use it. We just don't have time for it. We have more stuff than we have time for. So we started to help people kind of think through the way of the world, and suddenly you can see that the way of the world is a trap. The way of the world just kind of keeps us on that treadmill going round and round and round. And that would help people try to break out of that trap in the normal way, pay off credit card debts, all those kind of things. But then we want to come to this, what Emmett Fox is telling us. You cannot steal. Emmett Fox in there says if you had a $20 bill and you knew that $20 bill was yours by right of consciousness, you could lay it down in the middle of Times Square, New York City, and you could go back the next day and it would still be there because it was yours. It was yours by right of consciousness. Now we listen to that and we say, well, he's crazy. I've been to New York, I've been to Times Square, he's crazy, $20 bill wouldn't last a second on the street. And most of us would be right because that's where our consciousness is. So what I'm proposing, what I'm asking you to consider today is that the natural evolution of technology in the world, we can see that it is going to eliminate physical labor at some point, at some point if not already. Right now, if you think about the paradigm shifts taking place in our economy, 28 states in the United States, the truck drivers make up the largest segment of the wage earners. And yet the technology is being trialed today that can eliminate the need for truck drivers, the majority of truck drivers, within 10 years' time. As I discussed, workers in fast food restaurants won't need people at the counter. In grocery stores now, you'll shop for your groceries online, and the robots will go around a warehouse. They'll pull your order. They'll put it in a self-driving car that will come right up to your house and bring them to you. So think about all of the physical activities that are going to go away. What we want to do is we want to break out of this idea that says you have to work hard for your money, that it's by the sweat of your brow. We even want to break out of the idea that says you have to work intellectually hard for your money. And we want to come to a deeper understanding. And that deeper understanding is this, is that everything that is here in our life is here by right of consciousness. Everything. Emerson talks about it in Compensation. Butterworth talks about it in his book Spiritual Economics. We want to just get away from the idea that it is the physical or the intellectual that's important. We want to recognize that things come into our lives and they stay in our lives by right of our consciousness. And our goal then is to grow that consciousness. To grow that consciousness. And Butterworth tells us that one of the best ways to grow consciousness is to give. To give, kind of back where we were a week ago. We have to exhale before we can inhale. You know, the first exhalation was done for us by the natural process of birth. After that, it's up to us. But you have to exhale before you can inhale. So can we awaken in the morning? Can we get up in the morning and say to ourselves, this is the day the Lord, the law, L-A-W, the Lord has made. Everything that comes into my life today comes in by right of consciousness. Every cell, every organ, every tissue of my body functions perfectly because it is an instrument of God's giving. Whoever I need to meet this day, I invite into my consciousness, into my presence. Wherever I need to be this day, I go freely and I go willingly. Can we bless the cars that we get into, the transportation, recognize that this is divine love providing for itself as us, the means of transportation that is appropriate for us today. 100 years ago, or 150 years ago, it might have been a horse. 1,000 years ago, it might have been a pair of sandals. 200 years from now, it will be something entirely differently. It doesn't matter. It will be appropriate for the time and the place. We recognize that the jobs that we go to are an opportunity for us to give, to express our love, to express our kindness, to grow our spirit, and not to get caught up into the appearances, not to get caught up into the transactions. There's an excellent book by Glenn Russell called The Man Who Tapped the Secrets of the Universe. No, I'm sorry, it's Glenn Clark. And the book is about Walter Russell. And Walter Russell lived quite some time ago. But he was determined to put these truths to the test. He took a job one summer, excuse me, as a bellhop at a resort. And the way that the resorts paid then and the way they pay now is they paid very low wages, and they told the employees, well, you'll make it up on tips. You'll make it up on, be nice to people and they'll give you money. And he had been studying these metaphysical principles, and he said, well, you know what? I'm not going to take a tip. I'm going to refuse every tip that anybody offers me. I'm going to do what I do just because I love doing it, and I'm going to give the best service that I can possibly give this day. And he did. He did. People would offer him tips, and he would turn them down. He said, nope, it's my pleasure to serve. I'm just here because I want to be here. I don't want your tips. And he did extra. He went above and beyond for them. This was apparently a place where families would come, and they were well-to-do families at that. And they would come and they would stay for the summer, and some of them had infants. And he would get up in the middle of the night, and he would go to the kitchen, and he would warm a bottle of milk and bring the bottle of milk to the mother, so the mother could give the child warm milk in the middle of the night. And he would refuse the tips. He wouldn't take the tips. He said, nope, I live in a spiritual universe. I'm learning how to use these spiritual laws, and I will make more money than any other bellman makes, but I'm not going to do it their way. We're going to let the power of spirit do it. And he did. And he did. One of those families took him in and paid for his college education because they liked him so much. Glenn Clark wrote the book from a Christian point of view, and he said this is a man who understood the Sermon on the Mount and lived its principles. Seek ye first the kingdom, and everything else shall be added unto you. Don't work harder with your body or your mind. Work smarter with your consciousness. Every day, grow in spirit. And that's why you're here. Everything else is turning to dust. Your spirit is forever. You are a spiritual being now. And so it is.